Good morning, everybody. Last time we talked about the non-aggression principle, the idea that violence or theft ought not be used against non-violent or non-stealing people. We talked about how all laws, both good and bad, are ultimately enforced through the threat of violence, and we talked about how these two concepts lead to the ideas of anarchism. I'll put a link to that video in the comments below. Today I'd like us to discuss a corollary of the non-aggression principle, voluntaryism. A corollary is a proposition that logically follows from a preceding proposition, in this case the non-aggression principle. Voluntaryism is defined as a system of ethics which states that all voluntary interactions between one person or a group of persons, since they are voluntarily agreed upon, ought to be permitted. It should be noted that voluntaryism does not itself assess the moral or immoral nature of any given action. It only claims that since all parties voluntarily agreed to it, that it must be permitted. The argument goes as such. Since violence ought not to be used against nonviolent people, and since all laws, good or bad, are enforced through the threat of violence, there ought to be no law against nonviolent action. And, since all actions voluntarily agreed upon by all individuals involved are by their very nature nonviolent actions, it follows that all voluntary interactions ought to be legal. The careful listener should have an objection at this point. Not all voluntary interactions are nonviolent, are they? Okay, good point. A boxer who decides to box will get hit. I may want my super sexy wife to whip and paddle me. Hey baby, that's not really what I'm into, but if you're into it, I'll give it a try just for you. Or what about the patient suffering from cancer who wants his doctor to help him commit suicide? Okay, so we need to clarify what we mean by violence in this context then. For this context, let's define violence as an action against a person or their property without that person's consent. And now, with this definition, we can reformulate our argument for voluntaryism as such. Since it is wrong to act upon another person without their consent, provided that they are not acting upon someone else without their consent, and since all voluntary interactions are interactions consented to, it follows that one should not act without consent against those voluntary actions. Now that language sounds really clunky, so let me summarize the conclusion simply. Don't use violence against consenting people. Or, in other words, all voluntary interactions ought to be legal. I prefer the term voluntaryism over anarchism because I'd personally like to be defined by what I'm for, voluntary interactions, not what I'm against, the government. Still, most often I use the term anarchism, mostly because that word is better known despite its Mad Max, Walking Dead mischaracterizations. Moving onward, a second objection to the idea of voluntaryism ought to be something like, not all actions which seem voluntary are actually voluntary, are they? For example, the drug addict who must consume drugs, or the thirsty man in the desert who comes upon someone selling water from a truck and promises his whole house back home for just one glass of cold water. Surely these people are being coerced by their situation, aren't they? I'm actually going to still call both these actions voluntary, and another time we'll discuss drug addictions and water monopolies in more depth. But for now, I will point out that the tons and tons of people who have come off drugs proves that though the choice is hard, it is still a voluntary choice. Likewise, the man selling water out in the desert, a pariah though he may seem, certainly has done the thirsty man no harm. Before, the man had no choice, but the waterman has given him a choice, and therefore their transaction is also voluntary. It may not seem fair for a man to charge so much for water out in the middle of the desert, but consider that without the opportunity for that salesman to make such a great profit, if he hadn't have gotten out of bed that day trying to make money, the thirsty man likely would have died, dehydrated and alone. Okay, so we have the non-aggression principle, which tells us what should not be allowed, namely violence against nonviolent people, and this implies that we shouldn't force nonviolent people to do things. And we have voluntaryism, which says what things should be allowed in a free society, namely all voluntary things. So here is a list of things I personally would like to see happen, but that according to voluntarism and the non-aggression principle, I should never try to force on anyone else. Going to church, giving to the needy, supporting your community, forming co-ops, defending innocent lives, protecting natural resources, or wearing seatbelts. According to voluntarism or the non-aggression principle, though I may like to see all these things happen, I can never force anybody to try to do these things. And here is a list of things which I personally think are wrong, but that voluntarism or the non-aggression principle tells me I should never use force to stop. Doing drugs, blackmail, lying, prostitution, discrimination, divorce, or homosexuality. Wait, what? You're against gay people? No, I'm not against anybody, but I am a Christian and this is what I believe. And if you ask me, if you give me that place in your life where you actually want my opinion, I'll give it to you. But that's the beauty of voluntarism and anarchism. Once I put down my metaphorical gun, once I promise never to force you or to use the government to force you to do anything except not kill or not steal, once you can feel safe knowing that no one has the right or ever will try to control you, once you know that's not on the agenda, all that's left between us is loving and interesting discussion between two people about different ideas of how life could be lived. Without force, we can be loving and peaceful, even about controversial issues. And that's where I think I want to end, with a message to my Christian friends. Yes, this goes for atheists, conservatives, liberals, everyone else too. Still, I think it's best for me to criticize within my own tribe first. So Christians, put down your guns. Give up trying to control others. When it comes to consenting adults, put the guns of government down. I know you want to help their souls, but no one ever came to Christ through man's force or threats of violence. No one comes to God but voluntarily. And a man forced to be moral has made no moral choice at all. Everybody, liberal, conservative, Christian, atheist, Hindu, Jew, whatever, be moral. Do the moral thing. Reject the initiation of violence. Be love. Be good. Be voluntarism. And we can sort all the rest of it out later. Hey everybody, iron sharpens iron, so if you have any disagreements or questions, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Also, if you think what I'm doing is super awesome, you should tell me that too. And if you think what I'm doing is super duper awesome, then like and share this video. Okay everybody, bye.